In March 1987, deep within a classified facility beneath the Nevada desert, a weapons test went catastrophically wrong. The explosion that followed wasn't nuclear, wasn't chemical, and wasn't biological. It was something else entirely. Something that made grown men weep and hardened military officials classify the entire program so deeply that even today, 40 years later, most government agencies don't know it existed. The weapon they were testing that day would have changed warfare forever. It could have ended conflicts without firing a single conventional round, stopped armies in their tracks without spilling blood, and brought nations to their knees without destroying a single building. But the Pentagon buried it, denied its existence, scattered the research team across different continents and locked away every document, every photograph, every scrap of evidence in vaults so secure that some say the keys were destroyed. What I'm about to tell you comes from sources who have spent decades living with the weight of what they witnessed. Military personnel who signed non-disclosure agreements that could land them in federal prison for life. Scientists who watched their life's work vanish overnight. Intelligence operatives who know that some secrets are kept not to protect national security, but to protect humanity itself from what we're capable of creating. This isn't another story about sup-ups. This is about the day rest technology or government cover. The United States military created a weapon so effective, so terrifying in its implications, that they chose to pretend it never existed rather than unleash it upon the world. The weapon that could have won every war, but at a cost that even the Pentagon found too high to pay. The story begins in 1983, during the height of the Cold War, when the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency received an unusual proposal from Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist who had been studying the effects of electromagnetic fields on human consciousness. Chen wasn't your typical military contractor. She had spent her early career researching treatments for severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, using precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses to alter brain chemistry in ways that traditional medicine couldn't achieve. Her breakthrough came when she discovered that specific frequencies could not only treat mental illness, but could induce precise emotional and psychological states in healthy subjects. Fear, confusion, overwhelming sadness, complete euphoria, paralyzing indecision. With the right equipment and the correct frequency patterns, she could make a person experience any emotional state she chose, and they would believe those emotions were entirely their own. The implications for psychological warfare were staggering. Imagine enemy soldiers suddenly overcome with such profound homesickness that they abandoned their posts to return to their families. Picture enemy commanders struck with crippling self-doubt at the moment of crucial tactical decisions. Envision entire armies rendered combat ineffective not through death or injury, but through precisely induced psychological states that made them incapable of fighting. When Chen presented her research to DARPA, the initial reaction was skepticism. Military officials had seen countless proposals for exotic weapons over the years. Sonic weapons, psychoactive chemical agents, subliminal messaging systems. Most proved to be either ineffective in real-world conditions or too unpredictable to deploy safely. But Chen's research was different. She had documentation, video evidence of test subjects experiencing dramatic psychological changes within minutes of exposure to her electromagnetic frequency generators. The test footage was compelling in ways that made even hardened military officers uncomfortable. Volunteers who entered the testing chamber confident and alert would emerge 20 minutes later in states of such profound terror that they required sedation. Others would experience joy so intense they would laugh uncontrollably for hours. Some subjects became so deeply introspective they would sit motionless for days, lost in contemplation of thoughts that hadn't existed before their exposure. What made Chen's technology particularly disturbing was its subtlety. Subjects exposed to her electromagnetic frequency manipulation didn't realize their thoughts and emotions were being externally controlled. They experienced the induced psychological states as completely genuine, arising naturally from their own minds. A soldier made to feel overwhelming fear would create rational justifications for that fear, convinced that his terror was a reasonable response to genuine threats only he could perceive. By late 1983, DARPA had classified Chen's research under the codename Project Mindbridge and relocated her team to the underground facility in Nevada. The location was chosen for its isolation and its natural electromagnetic shielding properties, which would prevent any accidental exposure of the surrounding population to the frequency generators during testing. The Nevada facility had originally been constructed during the 1960s as a backup command center in case of nuclear attack. 300 feet beneath the desert floor, the complex consisted of interconnected chambers carved directly from solid rock and lined with specialized metals that could contain any form of electromagnetic radiation. The facility's isolation was so complete that personnel assigned there often went months without seeing sunlight or breathing unfiltered air. Dr. Chen's team consisted of 12 specialists drawn from fields that had never collaborated before. Neurologists, electrical engineers, quantum physicists, behavioral psychologists, and even 2 musicologists whose expertise in frequency harmonics proved crucial to the project's success. The team worked in complete secrecy, prohibited from discussing their research with anyone outside the facility, including family members and colleagues. The early experiments at the Nevada facility focused on refining Chen's frequency generators and testing their effects on volunteer subjects drawn from military personnel who had been told only that they were participating in classified research into advanced communications technology. The volunteers underwent extensive psychological evaluation before and after exposure to ensure that any changes in their mental state could be accurately documented. The results exceeded even Chen's optimistic projections. Within 6 months, her team had identified specific electromagnetic frequencies that could induce more than 40 distinct psychological and emotional states with remarkable precision. They could make subjects aggressive or passive, confident or terrified, focused or confused, loyal or rebellious. The effects typically lasted between 2 and 6 hours, depending on the intensity and duration of exposure. More importantly, the team discovered that multiple frequencies could be layered together to create complex psychological profiles. A soldier could be made simultaneously fearful and compliant, or aggressive, but unable to think strategically. Enemy commanders could be induced to feel overwhelming confidence in suicidal tactics, or paralyzed by indecision at crucial moments. By 1985, the technology had progressed to the point where portable frequency generators could affect targets at distances of up to half a mile. The generators themselves were surprisingly compact, no larger than a standard military radio, and could be powered by conventional batteries for up to 8 hours of continuous operation. A single operator could potentially influence the psychological state of hundreds of enemy personnel simultaneously. Field testing began in early 1986 using simulated combat scenarios at remote military training facilities. Test subjects were divided into opposing forces and given tactical objectives to accomplish while unknowingly exposed to frequency manipulation. The results were so dramatic that several exercises had to be terminated early when entire units became psychologically incapable of continuing their missions. In one particularly striking test, a company of Marines tasked with capturing a defended position were exposed to frequencies designed to induce extreme homesickness and family-oriented thoughts. Within 30 minutes, more than half the unit had abandoned their mission and were attempting to contact their families through unauthorized radio communications. The remaining Marines became so focused on their desire to return home that they proved incapable of following basic tactical orders. Another exercise tested the technology's potential for crowd control during civil unrest scenarios. Volunteer subjects playing the role of angry protesters were exposed to frequencies designed to induce feelings of contentment and social harmony. The transformation was remarkable. Within minutes, the simulated riot had dissolved into what observers described as an impromptu community gathering, with former adversaries engaging in friendly conversations and cooperative activities. The implications were staggering. Traditional riot control methods relied on physical force, chemical agents, or the threat of violence to disperse hostile crowds. Chen's technology could achieve the same results by simply making people not want to fight anymore. Angry mobs could be transformed into peaceful assemblies without anyone being injured, arrested, or even realizing they had been influenced. But it was during the winter of 1986 that the project took a darker turn. Military planners began requesting tests of the technology's potential for what they euphemistically called enhanced interrogation applications. They wanted to know if electromagnetic frequency manipulation could be used to break down psychological resistance in prisoners and make them more cooperative during questioning. The initial interrogation tests used volunteer subjects from the military's survival training programs, personnel who had been trained to resist conventional interrogation techniques. The volunteers were told they would be participating in advanced resistance training designed to prepare them for capture by enemies possessing exotic psychological warfare capabilities. The results were deeply troubling. Subjects who had successfully resisted hours of conventional interrogation techniques would begin providing information within minutes of exposure to specific frequency patterns. The electromagnetic manipulation didn't cause physical pain or obvious mental distress. Instead, it created psychological states that made resistance seem pointless or impossible. Some subjects were induced to feel overwhelming trust toward their interrogators, leading them to volunteer information as if speaking to close friends. Others experienced such profound guilt about their silence that they felt compelled to confess everything they knew. Still others were made to feel that their resistance was causing unbearable anxiety, and that cooperation was the only way to achieve psychological relief. What made these results particularly disturbing was that the subjects remained convinced their cooperation was voluntary. They didn't feel coerced or tortured. They genuinely believed they were choosing to provide information based on their own rational decision-making processes. Even after the effects wore off, many subjects insisted their cooperation had been freely given and appropriate under the circumstances. By early 1987, Project Mindbridge had evolved into something far beyond Dr. Chen's original vision. The technology she had developed to treat mental illness had become a comprehensive system for psychological manipulation, with applications ranging from battlefield tactics to intelligence gathering to crowd control. The Pentagon was preparing to deploy the first operational units later that year. But there was one final test that military planners insisted on conducting before full deployment. They wanted to verify the technology's effectiveness against truly hostile subjects under realistic combat conditions. The test would use actual enemy prisoners captured during recent operations in Central America, men who had genuine reasons to resist interrogation and no knowledge that they were participating in an experimental program. Dr. Chen objected strenuously to using unwilling subjects who couldn't provide informed consent. She argued that such testing violated both medical ethics and the Geneva Conventions regarding the treatment of prisoners. Her concerns were overruled by military officials who insisted that the technology's potential strategic value justified extraordinary measures to verify its effectiveness. The test was scheduled for March 15, 1987. 12 prisoners were transported to the Nevada facility under heavy security and housed in specially constructed chambers that could be precisely controlled for electromagnetic exposure. The prisoners were told they were being moved to a standard interrogation facility and had no knowledge of the exotic technology they were about to encounter. What happened during that final test would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives and lead to the immediate termination of Project Mindbridge. The technology worked exactly as designed, but the consequences of its success proved so horrifying that the Pentagon chose to bury the entire program rather than continue development. But that's a story that requires careful telling. Because what occurred in that underground facility on March 15th, 1987, revealed something about human consciousness and the nature of free will that challenged everything we thought we understood about the mind itself. The test began at 800 hours on that fateful March morning, with Dr. Chen reluctantly overseeing the frequency calibration while military observers watched from a heavily shielded control room 3 levels above the detention chambers. The prisoners had been separated into individual cells, each one a perfect electromagnetic isolation chamber designed to contain and focus the frequency generators with surgical precision. Colonel James Morrison, the project's military liaison, had insisted on documenting every aspect of the test. Multiple cameras recorded from different angles, while sophisticated monitoring equipment tracked the prisoners' vital signs, brain activity, and stress hormone levels in real time. What they were about to witness would be preserved in classified archives that would never see daylight. The first phase involved exposing each prisoner to what Chen's team called baseline frequencies, electromagnetic patterns designed to induce mild confusion and disorientation. These were the same frequencies that had proven so effective during the training exercises with volunteer subjects. Within minutes, the monitoring equipment showed dramatic changes in the prisoners' brain activity patterns. Subject 1, a captured insurgent leader known for his fierce resistance to conventional interrogation, began exhibiting signs of profound uncertainty about his most basic beliefs. The man who had remained defiant through weeks of traditional questioning started speaking hesitantly about doubts he'd never experienced before. His voice carried a trembling quality that suggested genuine confusion rather than calculated deception. Subject 2 experienced what the monitoring equipment registered as artificially induced nostalgia, so intense it bordered on psychological torture. The grizzled fighter began weeping uncontrollably as he described childhood memories with vivid detail. Begging his interrogators to let him contact family members he claimed he hadn't thought about in decades. The electromagnetic manipulation had somehow amplified his capacity for emotional pain to unbearable levels. Dr. Chen watched the proceedings with growing alarm. The volunteer subjects in previous tests had never exhibited such extreme reactions to the baseline frequencies. Something about using unwilling subjects, people who were actively resisting the psychological manipulation, seemed to amplify the technology's effects in ways her team hadn't anticipated. By 1,000 hours, all 12 prisoners were exhibiting severe psychological distress despite being exposed to what should have been relatively mild frequency patterns. Their brain activity showed abnormal spikes in regions associated with memory formation and emotional processing. Several subjects were experiencing what appeared to be complete personality dissolution, losing track of their own identities while remaining physically conscious and responsive. Colonel Morrison ordered the team to proceed to Phase 2, despite Chen's increasingly urgent protests that the subjects were showing signs of permanent psychological damage. The military observers were fascinated by the technology's unexpected potency against hostile subjects. They saw the extreme reactions as proof that the system would be devastatingly effective against enemy personnel who couldn't be prepared for what they were experiencing. Phase 2 involved exposure to what the research team had designated as tactical frequencies, electromagnetic patterns designed to induce specific behavioral changes useful in combat situations. The prisoners were exposed to frequencies intended to create overwhelming fear, complete submissiveness, and total loss of tactical thinking ability. The results were immediate and catastrophic. Subject 3, previously the most defiant of the prisoners, began screaming in terror at hallucinations that existed only in his electromagnetically manipulated mind. The monitoring equipment showed brain activity patterns that resembled severe psychotic episodes, but the man remained physically unharmed and technically conscious. Subject 4, became so completely submissive that he began following orders that weren't being given, desperately trying to anticipate what his captors might want him to do. The electromagnetic manipulation had essentially erased his capacity for independent thought, leaving behind what one observer described as a biological machine programmed only to obey. Most disturbing was Subject 7, whose exposure to the fear-inducing frequencies created a feedback loop that the monitoring equipment couldn't fully explain. The man's terror became so intense that it seemed to generate its own momentum, creating escalating waves of psychological horror that continued building even after the frequency generators were shut down. Dr. Chen demanded an immediate halt to the testing, arguing that the subjects were experiencing forms of psychological torture that violated every ethical standard in medical research. She pointed to the monitoring data showing that several prisoners were exhibiting brain activity patterns consistent with severe trauma that might never heal. But Colonel Morrison and his team were witnessing exactly what they had hoped to see. Here was proof that their electromagnetic weapon could break the will of the most hardened enemies without leaving physical evidence of torture. The technology offered the possibility of extracting information from prisoners while maintaining plausible deniability about the methods used. The final phase of testing pushed the frequency generators to their maximum settings, exposing the prisoners to electromagnetic patterns that had never been tested on human subjects. Chen's team had theoretical models suggesting what these frequencies might accomplish, but no empirical data about their effects on human consciousness. What happened next defied everything the researchers thought they understood about the relationship between electromagnetic fields and brain function. The high-intensity frequencies didn't just manipulate the prisoner's emotions or thought processes, they appeared to fundamentally alter the subject's relationship with reality itself. Subject 9 began describing experiences that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. He spoke coherently about conversations with deceased family members, providing specific details about events that monitoring equipment confirmed he couldn't possibly know. The electromagnetic manipulation seemed to have granted him access to information that existed beyond his own memories or sensory experience. Subject 11 exhibited what observers described as selective omniscience, demonstrating detailed knowledge about the personal lives of his interrogators, despite having no previous contact with them. He accurately described the contents of classified documents stored in secure facilities hundreds of miles away, information that subsequent verification confirmed was completely accurate. The monitoring equipment registered brain activity patterns unlike anything in medical literature. The prisoners were exhibiting consciousness states that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, while simultaneously experiencing psychological torture so severe that several observers became physically ill watching the proceedings. Dr. Chen's final attempt to halt the testing was overruled when military officials realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of warfare. The electromagnetic frequencies weren't just manipulating the prisoners' minds. They were somehow expanding human consciousness in ways that provided access to information and experiences that shouldn't have been possible. By 1400 hours, 3 of the 12 subjects had entered catatonic states that monitoring equipment suggested might be permanent. Their brains showed activity in regions that typically remain dormant, while areas responsible for basic survival functions began shutting down. The men remained technically alive, but their consciousness seemed to have detached from physical reality entirely. The other 9 prisoners were experiencing various forms of psychological breakdown that combined expanded awareness with unbearable emotional suffering. They could describe events happening in distant locations while simultaneously begging for death to end their mental anguish. The technology had created a form of consciousness that was simultaneously superhuman and utterly tortured. It was Subject 12 who provided the revelation that would end Project Mindbridge forever. Under the influence of the maximum intensity frequencies, the man began speaking in languages he didn't know, providing information about classified military operations he couldn't have accessed, and describing in precise detail the thoughts and emotions of everyone in the facility. But most terrifyingly, he began predicting future events with accuracy that monitoring equipment confirmed was impossible through conventional means. He described military operations that were still in the planning stages, political developments that wouldn't occur for months, and personal details about the lives of research team members that wouldn't become true until years later. The electromagnetic manipulation had somehow granted him access to information that existed outside normal temporal boundaries. He was experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously while remaining trapped in a state of consciousness so painful that his screams echoed through the facility's reinforced corridors. Dr. Chen realized they had crossed a line that science wasn't prepared to handle. The technology designed to manipulate human emotions had accidentally discovered something far more profound and dangerous. They had found a way to fundamentally alter human consciousness itself, expanding awareness beyond normal limitations while creating suffering so intense it bordered on the metaphysical. The implications were staggering and terrifying. If electromagnetic frequencies could expand consciousness to include knowledge of future events, access to distant information, and communication with deceased individuals, then the technology represented a breakthrough that would revolutionize human understanding of reality itself. But the cost was psychological torture so severe, it might represent a crime against consciousness itself. As the sun set over the Nevada desert on March 15, 1987, the 12 test subjects remained in various states of expanded consciousness and unbearable suffering. Their minds had been opened to experiences that human psychology wasn't equipped to handle, creating forms of awareness that were simultaneously enlightening and destroying. The Pentagon faced a choice that would define the future of warfare and human consciousness itself. They possessed technology that could grant superhuman awareness while inflicting psychological torture beyond anything previously imaginable. The weapon that could win every war had revealed capabilities that transcended warfare entirely, touching on fundamental questions about the nature of human consciousness and reality itself. What happened in the hours following that revelation would determine whether humanity was ready to possess technology that could fundamentally alter the nature of human consciousness itself. The monitoring equipment continued recording as Subject 12's prophetic utterances became increasingly specific and verifiable. He described the exact contents of conversations taking place in Pentagon briefing rooms 3,000 miles away, conversations that were simultaneously being recorded by military stenographers who would later confirm every word. Colonel Morrison found himself in an impossible position. The weapon his superiors had ordered him to develop had evolved beyond anything they had imagined. This wasn't just psychological warfare anymore. This was technology that could grant human beings access to information that existed outside the normal boundaries of space and time. The strategic implications were mind-bending, but so were the ethical considerations. At 1800 hours, Dr. Chen made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Despite direct orders to continue the testing, she activated the facility's emergency shutdown protocols, cutting power to all frequency generators and sealing the detention chambers. The sudden cessation of electromagnetic manipulation left the 12 subjects in various states of psychological collapse, their expanded consciousness snapping back to normal human limitations, like rubber bands stretched beyond their breaking point. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Subjects who had been experiencing omniscient awareness moments before found themselves trapped in normal human consciousness, while retaining vivid memories of their expanded state. The psychological trauma was unlike anything in medical literature. They had experienced godlike awareness and then been forced back into the limitations of ordinary human perception. Several began screaming that they had been blinded, not physically, but mentally, cut off from a form of consciousness they now knew was possible. Subject 12, who had been predicting future events with impossible accuracy, fell silent for nearly an hour before beginning to speak in a voice that monitoring equipment registered as completely different from his normal speech patterns. He described the experience as having been connected to what he called the information structure of reality itself, a vast network of interconnected consciousness that existed beyond individual human minds. According to his account, the electromagnetic frequencies had somehow synchronized his brain activity with patterns that existed at a fundamental level of reality. He had gained access not just to distant information or future events, but to what he described as the underlying code that generated all experience. He could see the mathematical relationships that connected all consciousness, the energy patterns that linked every mind across space and time, but the experience had come at a cost that transcended physical or emotional suffering. He explained that human consciousness wasn't designed to process such vast amounts of information simultaneously. The awareness had been like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup. Every moment of expanded consciousness had caused psychological structures to crack under pressure they weren't built to handle. The other subjects reported similar experiences, though each had access to different aspects of what they consistently described as a larger consciousness that encompassed all individual minds. Subject 3 had experienced the thoughts and emotions of everyone in the facility simultaneously, creating empathy so intense it had felt like psychological torture. Subject 7 had gained access to the complete history of human conflict, experiencing every battle, every death, every moment of suffering in warfare throughout history, as if it were happening to him personally. Dr. Chen's medical examinations revealed brain changes that shouldn't have been possible. The electromagnetic exposure had apparently triggered the growth of new neural pathways, while simultaneously damaging existing structures in ways that created permanent alterations to the subject's consciousness. They had been fundamentally changed at a neurological level, their brains rewired to process information in ways that human evolution had never intended. The Pentagon's response was swift and decisive. Within 24 hours, Project Mindbridge was officially terminated and classified at levels that made its existence legally deniable. The 12 test subjects were transferred to a medical facility where they would spend the remainder of their lives under constant observation. Their expanded consciousness carefully studied while being kept isolated from the outside world. Dr. Chen and her research team were immediately reassigned to different projects in different countries, their security clearances revoked and their memories of the project allegedly chemically suppressed through experimental treatments that may or may not have been effective. The facility in Nevada was sealed and abandoned, its electromagnetic shielding ensuring that no trace of the frequency generator's effects could escape to influence the surrounding population. But the implications of what they had discovered couldn't be completely contained. Intelligence agencies around the world had been monitoring electromagnetic research, and fragments of information about Project Mindbridge's results had leaked through channels that military censors couldn't completely control. Foreign governments began their own electromagnetic consciousness research programs, leading to an arms race in psychic warfare that continued in absolute secrecy for decades. The Soviet Union's program, designated Operation Mental Storm, attempted to reverse engineer the American technology using information obtained through espionage networks. Their experiments, conducted in facilities beneath the Siberian permafrost, reportedly achieved similar results with even more catastrophic consequences. Chinese military researchers developed their own approach, using traditional meditation techniques combined with electromagnetic enhancement, creating what intelligence reports described as warrior monks with supernatural combat abilities. Meanwhile, the 12 subjects of the original test continued to exist in a state of consciousness that medical science couldn't adequately describe or treat. They retained fragments of their expanded awareness, experiencing random moments when their perception would suddenly encompass vast amounts of information before snapping back to normal human limitations. These episodes were unpredictable and apparently uncontrollable, creating psychological instability that required constant medical supervision. Subject 12 became the focus of intensive study by researchers who were attempting to understand the long-term effects of electromagnetic consciousness expansion. His brain continued to exhibit unusual activity patterns, occasionally displaying neural firing sequences that seemed to correspond with events occurring in distant locations. During these episodes, he would provide accurate descriptions of classified military operations, political developments, and scientific discoveries that he couldn't possibly have accessed through conventional means. The medical team studying him theorized that the electromagnetic frequencies had created permanent changes to his brain structure that allowed intermittent access to what they cautiously termed non-local information. His consciousness appeared to have been permanently altered in ways that occasionally granted him awareness beyond normal human limitations, though these experiences continued to cause severe psychological distress. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the neurologist assigned to study the long-term effects, documented cases where Subject 12 would accurately predict natural disasters days before they occurred, describe the contents of sealed documents he had never seen, and provide detailed accounts of conversations taking place thousands of miles away. The accuracy of his information was consistently verified through independent sources, confirming that his expanded consciousness episodes were genuine rather than delusional. But the psychological cost remained devastating. Each episode of expanded awareness was followed by periods of severe depression as his consciousness contracted back to normal human limitations. He described the experience as being repeatedly given glimpses of ultimate truth before having it snatched away, creating a form of spiritual torture that conventional medicine couldn't address. The other subjects exhibited similar patterns, though their expanded awareness manifested in different ways. Subject 3 continued to experience occasional episodes of extreme empathy, during which he would become aware of the emotional states of everyone within several miles of his location. The intensity of shared emotion was so overwhelming that these episodes required immediate medical intervention to prevent complete psychological breakdown. Subject 7's expanded awareness focused on historical information, granting him detailed knowledge of past events that hadn't been documented in any accessible records. During his episodes, he would provide accounts of ancient battles, lost civilizations, and historical figures that archaeological evidence later confirmed as accurate. His consciousness seemed to have gained access to a kind of historical memory that transcended individual human experience. The Pentagon's official position remained absolute denial of Project Mindbridge's existence, but intelligence agencies continued to monitor the subjects and study the implications of their altered consciousness. The technology had demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond psychological warfare, touching on fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human potential. Classified research programs continued to investigate electromagnetic consciousness manipulation, though none attempted to replicate the extreme intensity that had created the original subject's expanded awareness. Military planners recognized that the technology's potential applications extended far beyond warfare into areas that could revolutionize human understanding of consciousness itself. But they also understood that such power came with responsibilities that humanity might not be prepared to handle. The weapon that could have won every war had revealed capabilities that transcended warfare entirely, offering access to forms of consciousness that human psychology and social structures weren't equipped to integrate safely. The 12 subjects remained living proof that some boundaries of human experience existed for reasons that went beyond mere biological limitation. Their expanded consciousness had granted them access to information and awareness that was genuinely superhuman. but the psychological cost had been so severe that their enhanced capabilities had become a form of permanent torture. By 1990, 3 years after the original test, Subject 12 had developed what researchers described as temporal displacement syndrome, experiencing random moments when his consciousness would slip backward or forward in time, providing him with memories of events that hadn't yet occurred or detailed recollections of historical periods he had never lived through. The episodes were becoming more frequent and more intense, suggesting that his altered consciousness was continuing to evolve in ways that medical science couldn't predict or control. The medical team monitoring Subject 12 began documenting increasingly disturbing developments in his condition. During his temporal displacement episodes, he would speak with the voice and mannerisms of people from different time periods, as if his consciousness was temporarily merging with individuals who had lived decades or centuries earlier. Security footage from his observation chamber showed him conducting detailed conversations with invisible participants, providing both sides of dialogues with historical figures whose existence could be verified through archived records. Dr. Hendricks noted that these episodes weren't hallucinations in any conventional sense. Subject 12 would provide information about historical events that wasn't available in any documented sources, details that subsequent research would confirm through archaeological discoveries or newly declassified documents. His consciousness seemed to be accessing what she cautiously termed the experiential memory of human civilization itself. The implications terrified the research team more than the original weapons applications ever had. If electromagnetic manipulation could grant access to the accumulated experiences of all human consciousness throughout history, then the technology represented something far more profound than a military weapon. They had potentially discovered a method for directly interfacing with what ancient philosophers had called the collective unconscious, the shared repository of human experience that existed beyond individual minds. Subject 7's condition evolved along similar lines, though his expanded awareness focused on future rather than past events. His predictions became increasingly specific and verifiable, describing technological developments that wouldn't occur for years, political changes that seemed impossible given current circumstances, and natural phenomena that mainstream science insisted were unpredictable. The accuracy rate remained consistently above 90%, a statistical impossibility that forced researchers to acknowledge they were dealing with genuine precognitive abilities. But perhaps most disturbing was Subject 3's development of what the medical team designated as consciousness bridging syndrome. During his empathic episodes, he began reporting direct mental contact with other individuals who possessed similar altered states of consciousness. He could communicate telepathically with research subjects from foreign programs, sharing information across vast distances without any technological mediation. Through these contacts, the research team learned that electromagnetic consciousness research had spread far beyond their original project. Subject 3 reported mental communication with individuals in Soviet facilities, Chinese laboratories, and European research installations. Each program had apparently achieved similar results through different methodologies, creating a growing network of altered consciousness subjects who could communicate directly through means that transcended conventional physics. The strategic implications were staggering. If psychically enhanced individuals could share information instantaneously across any distance, then traditional concepts of military intelligence and national security became obsolete. Classified information could be transmitted through consciousness networks that no conventional technology could intercept or decode. The electromagnetic weapon that had been designed to provide tactical advantages had accidentally created communication capabilities that made all existing intelligence systems vulnerable. Military planners realized they faced a fundamental dilemma. The technology could grant unprecedented strategic advantages, but its effects couldn't be reliably controlled or contained. Each attempt to weaponize consciousness manipulation had resulted in capabilities that transcended the original military objectives, creating altered states of awareness that operated according to principles that existing science couldn't adequately explain or predict. By 1992, intelligence reports suggested that consciousness-enhanced individuals from various national programs were collaborating across political boundaries, sharing information, and coordinating activities through their psychic communication networks. The altered subjects seemed to be developing their own agenda, one that transcended the military objectives of their original creators. They had become a new category of human being, with capabilities that existing governmental structures weren't equipped to understand or control. Subject 12's temporal displacement episodes revealed disturbing information about the future development of consciousness manipulation technology. He described wars fought entirely through psychic means, with armies of electromagnetically enhanced soldiers battling for control of human consciousness itself. According to his visions, the technology would eventually evolve beyond military applications to become a tool for fundamentally altering the nature of human civilization. The research team documenting these revelations faced an ethical crisis that went beyond any previous military dilemma. They possessed technology that could grant superhuman capabilities, but every application seemed to create consequences that spiraled beyond human control. The subjects they had created were evolving into something that might no longer be entirely human, developing forms of consciousness that operated according to principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about individual identity and free will. Dr. Hendricks submitted her final report in December 1992, recommending immediate termination of all consciousness manipulation research and permanent isolation of the altered subjects. Her conclusions were unequivocal. Humanity lacked the wisdom and psychological maturity to safely possess technology that could fundamentally alter consciousness itself. The subjects had become living proof that some capabilities were too dangerous for human civilization to develop, regardless of their potential military or scientific applications. The Pentagon's response was characteristically decisive and secretive. All documentation of Project Mindbridge was reclassified at levels that made its existence legally impossible to acknowledge. The research subjects were transferred to a new facility constructed specifically to contain individuals with superhuman consciousness capabilities. The electromagnetic technology was declared too dangerous for any practical application, and all research materials were reportedly destroyed. Project Mindbridge remains buried in vaults so classified that the clearance levels required to access them may no longer exist. The 12 subjects who volunteered for what they believed would be routine military service became something beyond human classification, their consciousness permanently altered by technology that revealed capabilities humanity wasn't prepared to possess. Dr. Chen vanished into witness protection sometime in 1993. Her revolutionary research scattered across continents, and her identity erased from all official records. The facility beneath the Nevada desert was sealed with concrete and steel, its electromagnetic chambers now serving as a tomb for knowledge too dangerous to preserve. But the questions remain. If electromagnetic frequencies can expand human consciousness beyond its natural boundaries, what does that reveal about the true nature of awareness itself? The subjects discovered that individual minds might be merely fragments of a larger consciousness that encompasses all human experience across space and time. They touched something that existed beyond the limitations of biology and physics, accessing information that shouldn't have been possible through any known means. The Pentagon's denial of Project Mindbridge's existence serves a purpose that transcends national security. Some discoveries challenge the fundamental assumptions upon which human civilization is built. The technology they created didn't just represent a new category of weapon. It offered proof that consciousness itself might be something far more vast and interconnected than anyone had dared imagine. Today, nearly 4 decades later, The 12 subjects remain in facilities whose locations are known only to a handful of individuals, with clearances so deep they require congressional approval to access. Their expanded consciousness continues to evolve in ways that defy medical understanding, granting them capabilities that grow more profound and more troubling with each passing year. The weapon that could have won every war became something far more significant and far more terrifying. It became a key to unlocking the deepest mysteries of human consciousness itself, revealing truths that humanity may never be ready to fully comprehend or safely utilize. In the end, the Pentagon's greatest weapon wasn't the electromagnetic technology itself, but their wisdom in recognizing that some victories come at costs too high for civilization to bear. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, and some knowledge, once possessed, changes not just the knower, but the very nature of what it means to be human. The weapon the Pentagon denied may be the most important secret they ever kept,